Hi, this is Wendy, and welcome to my No Frills Java video series. Now, I don't do any fancy video production or anything, so you might hear traffic in the background, or my cat meowing, or my next door neighbors arguing with each other, but whatever. When you're coding in the real world, you're hearing these and lots of other noises, so just suck it up and get used to it. I'm going to show you some Java stuff, and I don't have the time or inclination to create any fancy videos with animation and all that other fancy production stuff. We're just going to learn and code with Java. Now, in this video series, we're introducing you to the basics of regular expressions and how to use them in a Java program. In the first video, we learned the basics of regular expressions. In the second video, we learned how to use character classes. In the third video, we learned how to use quantifiers. In the fourth video, we talked about escaping special characters and also how you can use meta characters. And in the fifth video, we learned how to create more advanced expressions by using capture groups. In this sixth video, we'll see how to use a simple method to perform regex matches in Java. And in the last video, I'll show you a more complex but more reusable and modular way to use regex in Java. Now, to use regular expressions in Java, you actually have two options. You have the easy way, which uses the String.matches method. So this matches method belongs to the string class. And it's a good option if you just want to check a single value with one pattern and you're not going to use that pattern on multiple values. So for example, if you have a program that asks the user for a quantity and then asks them for a price, and you want to make sure the quantity is a valid integer and the price is a valid floating point number, this is a great place to use the matches method because you're going to go and do one match on the quantity input and one different match on the price input, and that's it. That's all you need it for, so it's perfect. The second and more complex way is using a couple of classes called the pattern and matcher classes. And this is the best option if you're testing multiple values and reusing the same pattern several times. So for example, if you're writing a program that requests product codes for several products and you need to validate each product code entered with the same pattern, this is exactly where you would use the pattern and the matcher classes because you're asking for several product codes and you're validating each code with the exact same regex pattern. So we're going to start with the easy way. In the first video, we had this program that asked for a Fahrenheit temperature and then converted that Fahrenheit temperature to a Celsius temperature. And the program works just fine as long as you enter a valid integer. And so if I type in, for example, 2 as my Fahrenheit temperature, it converts that into negative 16.67 degrees Celsius. If I try a negative 2, I can totally do that. Negative 2 comes out to negative 18.89 degrees Celsius. However, you might recall that if I type in, for example, TWO, the word 2, because maybe I'm being a smartass, I don't know. So if I type in anything that's not digits, then it crashes. It gives me that input mismatch exception that we talked about before. So again, we talked about this in the first video. When you use the next int or next double method, if the user types in something that cannot convert into an int or a double, then it will give you an input mismatch exception. So for next int, you can only type the digits and you have the option of typing in a positive or negative symbol, as you saw as well. I didn't do the positive symbol, but you can. And similar with next double, the only difference is with next double, it allows 1 decimal point. Otherwise, it's exactly the same as next int. So ideally, we want to make sure our program doesn't crash. Now, one of the solutions we had thought of would be to maybe ask for the Fahrenheit temperature as a string. So I'll do that using the next method. I chose the next method because next line would grab any white space, and I don't really want any white space. I don't really care about the white space. And so once I grab my temperature as a string, I'm going to have to convert it into an integer. Otherwise, I'm not going to be allowed to calculate with it, right? We are calculating with it down here. So I'm going to have to convert that or parse it into an integer. Like that. So remember integer.parseInt, you give it a string and it converts that into a primitive int. Similarly, double.parseDouble does the same thing, but it'll return a primitive double. So now if I save my changes and then recompile my code and then execute it, again, I can type in 2 or negative 2 and it still works fine. And if I type in TWO, it's going to still crash, but this time it's giving me a number format exception. So that comes from the parse method. So parse int, parse double, all the parse methods will throw number format exception for the same reason that we got the input mismatch exception. When I type in letters, the parse int or parse double doesn't know what to do with them. It can't convert that into an integer or a double if you're using parse double. So what I'd like to actually be able to do is ask the user for their input, check and make sure that it actually matches the pattern for a positive or negative integer value, and then if it's valid, if it matches our pattern, then I will parse it into an integer, calculate the Celsius temperature, and display the Celsius temperature. And if it doesn't match the pattern, then I won't do any of this. Instead, I will display an error message. Now the matches method belongs to the string class, so I'm going to leave the code that retrieves the temperature, the Fahrenheit temperature, as a string. When you use string methods like matches or any of the other methods that you might learn or have learned, you have to invoke them on string objects. You cannot invoke them on, say, an integer value because it's not an object. You can't invoke a method on a primitive type. So charat, for example, if you've used that before, you can't invoke those on primitives like ints and doubles. They have to be invoked on objects like strings. So I'm going to keep this, but I'm going to add the code that then uses the matches method, and I'm going to invoke the matches method on our Fahrenheit temperature string input. And I'm going to have to make a regex pattern. So the regex pattern that we want to create is going to have to be for any valid positive or negative integer. So let's go over to our regex tester. So I've turned off the multi-line flag. We had that on in a previous video, and I've added a couple of different integer values. We've got lots of integers down here that we can test with, but I'll just copy over a couple like that. And then maybe we got some negative ones. So we got some negative ones. We got some positive ones that use a positive sign. Most users are probably not going to type the positive sign, but it's valid. So we're going to include it and make sure it passes our tests. And then some just regular integers. And it doesn't matter what values you put as long as they're integers. So we already know from a previous video how to do a regex for an integer value. We just use \d and then a plus sign, meaning one or more digits. So we got a digit and then the one or more quantifier after it. The thing now is you'll notice right away, it's matching the digit portions of each number, but it's not including the negative signs and the positive signs. We want it to include the positive negative signs, but also if you look down here, even though it's not highlighting the whole thing, it's highlighting the digit 6180. It's not highlighting the decimal point. We want to make sure that it recognizes this as an invalid integer because it has the decimal point. So what we want to say is this pattern should be one or more digits preceded by, meaning in front of the digits, you can allow either a positive sign or a negative sign. So we know that if we want to select one from a series or set of characters, we use a character class. If you were thinking, oh, the OR operator, because I said the word OR, not necessarily. If you want one of these characters, this one or this one or this one or this one, that's a character class, right? So we can just use a character class. So I want to say match either the positive sign or the negative sign. Now you might be thinking, hey, that negative sign, don't we have to escape that? Because in the earlier video, we talked about escape characters and how to escape and what to escape. So we talked about how if you have the negative sign or the minus sign inside a character class, you need to escape it because it's used in a range, right? Like A to Z or 0 to 9. But here's a funny thing. If your negative sign is not in between other items, so if it's first or last, you actually don't have to escape it. Regex engines are pretty smart and they're able to figure that out. But if it makes you feel better, you can still escape it if you want to. You'll notice here when I hover, it says, oh yeah, that matches a minus sign in its character code number 45 in case you care. But if I take it off, it still recognizes it as the same character. But that's only because it's at the end. If you had put other things in this character class, then you wouldn't be able to do this. You would have to, in fact, escape it. So just in case you were wondering. So I'm not going to escape it, but don't feel bad. If you want to, go right ahead. You can escape it. Now, this is optional. So right now, you'll notice that the way I've written it, it's matching now all my positive and negative numbers, but it's no longer matching these numbers. So we want to say that that's optional. So it's an optional positive or negative sign. Remember, we use the question mark quantifier as optional. It's there or it's not there. 1 or 0 matches. So now it's matching all of my positive, negative values, and it's also matching all these values down here. Now, it is matching the integer portion of this, but that's something that we'll talk about a little bit later. I think it's going to come up as an exercise. So there's our regex pattern. So what we can do is we can copy that, and we are going to put it in our Java program using the String.matches method. Now, the matches method, as I mentioned before, we invoke it on the string that we want to test. So this represents whatever string input or string value you want to test with your regex. And then this is the actual pattern portion of your regex expression. Recall that a regex expression is a /, a pattern, which contains tokens, and then another / followed by any flags. We actually don't need anything except the pattern part. And that was the part that I actually just copied and pasted. I copied this piece. That's what I copied and pasted to the clipboard, which is good. That's all I need. So we're going to paste that into here, and it's going to be a string literal, so it's going to be in double quotes. Now, we don't need to pass it any flags, and we don't need to include any boundary markers. So notice that I didn't include the caret symbol for starts with and the $ for ends with. The matches method assumes you want those, and they're already part of your pattern. So you do not have to include those as part of your pattern. The matches method already includes these. So that's another nice thing, which makes it easier when you're testing your regex and then bringing it into your code. That makes things a little bit easier. So this means in my code, if I wanted to use the matches method, I would start off with, there's more to this expression than what I'm going to type here. So I would start off with temp, and then I would use the matches method, and I would pass in there these characters. Whoops, get that back up there. There, these characters. Now, notice that we have an escape character in Java. In Java, the / is the escape character. It's now going to assume that we mean to use the D escape character. Like if you wanted new line, you would put \n, for example, like this. So it's assuming that this is some kind of escape character. And if you were to put this in a proper piece of code and compile it, it will give you a compile error. It's not going to allow you to do that. So it won't allow you to use \d. What we have to do is tell Java, no, I want the actual / inside this string. So you have to escape your / by adding a second \. So remember, when you copy and paste your working regexes into the matches method or any other place, there's a couple other places where you'll place a regex, you have to escape the / in Java. And I think that's going to be true of, actually in JavaScript, if you use the regex object, you don't have to. I'm trying to think, in PHP, I think you might have to. I can't remember, it's been too long. So just be careful when you're using other languages, double check and see if you have to escape that \. Some regex testers, you can select the Java flavor of regex and it will do that for you. Some editors, if you copy and paste a string that contains a \, I think IntelliJ does this, it will actually automatically escape any backslashes it finds. So that's kind of a nice thing too. So watch out for that you have to escape that \. If you put the / here as well, you'll have to do the same thing. Just put 2 \. So when you move a regex or copy a regex from your regex tester into Java code, just remember to escape all your \. Just add an extra \ in front of each one. Now, as I mentioned before, this method is going to return a Boolean. So what I'm going to do is use it as an if statement. So I'm going to write an if statement that just checks to see that our temperature input is a positive or negative integer. So I'm going to use an if and then add the parentheses. You don't have to say, don't you dare put = true or = false. That's not necessary. This already returns true or false. You don't have to say, oh, you're true. Are you true? Don't bother. So you just need this. That's it. So this will evaluate to true if this string matches this pattern. But if it doesn't, it'll return false. So what I'm going to do is, if this is true, I want to do all this code. So I'm going to indent it properly and then close the brace. This is the brace that goes with this if. If you feel comfortable, I'll show you a trick I sometimes do at the end to help you with your braces. And then on the else, like this, I'm just going to print an error message. I can do that as a print line. Error, temperature must be a whole number. And you can add, I'm running out of room, but you can add like positive or negative whole number, whatever you like. If you have trouble with multiple braces, we don't need this guy open right now. If you have trouble with multiple braces in your code, just tag them at the end. So this is the closing brace of the if statement. If you want, nothing wrong with that at all. If that helps you so you don't get lost with mismatched braces, go right ahead. It's not a problem. There we go. So now, and you can get fancy if you want to say like that temperature is not valid. You could do that as well. It's not a bad idea if you were in a GUI. But now I should be able to actually compile and run it. So I'm going to save. I'm going to compile. Get that back up there. And now I'm going to try it out. So there we go, enter a Fahrenheit temperature. So I want to make sure our good value still works. So -2 brings up the correct Celsius temperature, or that was a 2, sorry, this is a -2. I was getting ahead of myself. That one works. And now let's see what happens if I type TWO. It says, error, your temperature must be a whole number. Yay, it works. Now, if you're thinking like, hey, I want to just keep trying until they get it right, that's a whole other lesson. If you know how to write a loop, then yes, go right ahead. It's a little more complicated because if you said loop while this is false, then you would have to prompt your user again and get a new value. And then there you go. I don't know if that's necessarily an efficient use of the matches method. You might want to use the classes instead, but that's the next video. But, go ahead and try it. Why not? If you know loops. If you don't know loops, well, then just go watch the loops videos, and then you can learn how to do it with loops. Okay, go ahead and try this exercise to practice using the String.matches method. Write a program that asks the user for a course code that always must consist of exactly 4 uppercase or lowercase letters, followed by exactly 5 digits. Use Java's matches method. One of the things is that it doesn't allow you to use the flags. So when you played with, this was an exercise, this regex that we did in an earlier video, we probably used the case insensitive flag. You can't use that with the matches method. So you might recall in those videos I was saying, you can't always use this flag, so you should learn how to do it without the flag as well. This is that moment. So make sure that you practice or go back to your practice exercises and see if you've got a version of that that doesn't use the flag. And then, use the matches method and see if you can do the same thing. Write a little if statement. If it's valid, say so. If it's not valid, say so. Go ahead and pause the video, try this exercise, and then when you're done, you can resume the video and I'll show you the answer. Okay, hopefully you had a chance to try this exercise. Here's my really quick solution. So, of course, I created a scanner for the input. I grabbed the course code as a string. Again, I used the next method because course codes don't have spaces, at least not according to our description. And then I used a similar if statement with the matches method on my code string. And there's the regex that we used in a previous video, but instead of using the 0 to 9, I replaced it with the \d. And of course, I had to escape the backslash. I just did that for practice. So there it is, 4 upper or lowercase letters followed by exactly 5 digits. And if we try this out, we can see that if we type in a proper course code, so let's say we're taking underwater basket weaving 101 or 10001, and that is a valid course code. Hooray! And then let's see if I try, maybe I took basket 101, that's not a valid course code. And if I just type foo, that's not a valid course code. If I type foo 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's not a valid course code because I'm missing a letter, so that's invalid. And you can just We can sit here all day and just type different things that are invalid. That's the hard part, is trying to come up with all the combinations. But there you go. So now that's really, really basic. This is just an introduction. You can do all kinds of other stuff. In the very, very beginning, we talked about the price and quantity. So a really good practice exercise would be to write a program that asks for the price and quantity of something, and then write one of these to validate the price or the quantity first, whichever one you want to do first. And then if it's valid, do what you need to do. And then you can ask for them to validate what did I do first? The price, then do the quantity, whichever. So if the quantity is valid, then do the price. Or if the price is valid, then do the quantity. And there's a couple ways you could do that one too. So that would be a good practice exercise if you're looking to practice. If you're using my notes, I actually have practice exercises in those. And as usual, I will put the link to those in the video description so you can have a look at them and review everything that we've done so far. So that is how we can really quickly and efficiently check a user's input value using regex in Java. But it's not the most efficient technique if you have several inputs or if you're using the same pattern over and over again. For this, you should choose the more modular approach using the pattern and matcher classes, which I will cover in the next video. Until then, thanks for watching.